Welcome back, everyone, to Not the Right, where we break down the biggest stories making headlines today. I'm Natasha.
And I'm Nick. Today we're diving into a critical and devastating story, Hurricane Helene, and the absolute destruction it's caused across the southeastern United States. This storm has left over 100 dead, millions without power, and entire communities cut off. There's so much to discuss.
Yeah, Nick, the human toll is staggering. It's one of the deadliest hurricanes in recent memory, and it feels like the Southeast is in crisis mode. Not only are lives lost, but some communities are still completely out of communication. I mean, we're talking about places like Buncombe County, North Carolina, where residents are just now receiving food and water supplies days after the storm.
Right, and I was struck by the conditions in Buncombe County, especially in Asheville. They're dealing with flooded roads, no power, and dangerous conditions all around. I can't imagine living through that level of isolation, Natasha. 35 deaths in that one county alone, and they still have people unaccounted for.
It's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? And that's just one county. There are stories like Taylor Shelton's, who had to carve a way out of her own driveway just to escape. Her home surrounded by downed century-old trees, and she still hasn't heard from her in-laws. It's heartbreaking, especially when you consider that families are trying to reconnect, not knowing if their loved ones are okay.
That part really hit me. Families are literally cut off, relying on walkie-talkies or whatever means they can find to stay in touch. Can you imagine not knowing if your parents are safe? It's terrifying. And for the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, not hearing from his own son and daughter for 72 hours, that's just another level of anxiety.
Exactly. He's managing the response for the whole state while not knowing if his own kids are safe. It speaks to how widespread the devastation is. And communication failures are compounding the problem. No cell service in huge areas from Ohio to Florida. That lack of communication makes rescue efforts harder and slower.
And we know that time is critical in these situations. Rescue teams are working overtime, but even with the National Guard and emergency workers from 19 states involved, the rugged terrain in places like western North Carolina is almost impossible to navigate. Cooper mentioned landslides and flooding making roads impassable. It's a nightmare.
Plus, let's not forget about the economic devastation. Damage estimates are anywhere between $15 billion and $100 billion, with homes that have stood for decades just washed away. It's a long road to recovery, Nick.
Yeah, the sheer scope of the damage is overwhelming. You have to think about the people who have lost everything. Their homes, their livelihoods. In Lake Lure, for example, houses and businesses were literally swept away by mountain streams. That's hard to comprehend.
And speaking of leadership during this crisis, President Biden has announced he'll be visiting North Carolina later this week, and he's already discussing bringing Congress back for a special session to pass more aid. He's promising that the federal government isn't going to leave until the job is done. But you have to wonder how long recovery is going to take, especially with so much infrastructure wiped out.
Yeah, and the political ramifications are already starting to show. Vice President Kamala Harris cut her campaign trip short to be briefed on the situation, and she's planning to visit when it won't interfere with the rescue efforts. Meanwhile, Trump made a visit to a furniture store in Georgia that was heavily damaged by the storm. Both sides are trying to show leadership in this critical moment.
Of course, because even though we're in the middle of a national disaster, it's also campaign season, and everyone's looking at how leaders respond. But I do think Biden's statement about not leaving until the job is done hit the right note. There's going to be a lot of rebuilding needed, physically, emotionally, and politically.
No doubt. And as we move forward, we'll have to keep an eye on how the relief efforts evolve. What will FEMA's role be in the weeks and months to come? How will state and local governments handle the long-term rebuilding process? And most importantly, how are the people on the ground getting by as they try to pick up the pieces?
Definitely. In times like these, we see both the best and worst in how systems function under pressure. We're hoping for the best for those affected, and I'm sure we'll have more updates as the situation continues to unfold. If you're listening and wondering how you can help, We'll have links in the description for ways to donate and support relief efforts in the hardest hit areas.
Great point, Natasha. It's all hands on deck for recovery, and every bit of help counts. Let's hope we start seeing improvements for these communities sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to wrap things up for today. If you find this discussion helpful or informative, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on this and other major stories.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time on Not the Right.